Hello everyone, welcome to day 8 of my ceramic residency in Arita, Japan. I started off the morning with some painting on base plates. I'm using a line brush to do lines on these cherry blossom flowers. I'm working on getting a steady straight line. I've been told that the proper way of painting is to draw the outline first and then fill in the space afterwards. So I'm doing all the cherry blossom branches now. The paint that I use is a medium shade blue pigment underglaze. I plan on using a lighter shade of blue to fill in the flowers. I'm changing to a slightly bigger brush now because I'm going to do the flower buds and I need to fill in more space than just a line. I like to test out the color shade on a test plate first before committing on my final plate. The color I'm using to fill in the flower buds are a lighter shade in color than the one I use for lines. I'm sorry that the camera was out of focus here, but you can see better now that the color is actually quite light in color. These are really enjoyable to paint because they are just a simple circle. When I visit the pottery shop here, some of the masterpieces have amazing paint skills that you can see any of the brush strokes. I'm now using a big fat brush loaded with watery blue underglaze to paint the cherry blossoms. It is important that the tip is pointy so I can move the paint all the way around the flower without missing a spot. I like to start painting from the middle and then move outward and then finish back in the center. This way I predict that the center color will be darker in color than the outer edge. I'm still at the beginner stage at this type of painting, so you can clearly see the brushstroke in my flowers. I really aspire to achieve the look of no paintbrush stroke in my painting one day. If you have any experience in this type of painting technique and want to share any tips with me, please let me know in the comments. I also want to try the gradient effect technique I learned from yesterday's workshop. First, I stir my brush in the light blue paint and then get rid of the excess paint on the side of the pink container. Then I add some water in my small container so that it's full to the rim. Then I carefully dip only the tip of my brush on the edge of the water so the water is soaked only to the tip of the brush. Here's the moment of truth. Unfortunately, I didn't do this technique correctly, so there's no water on the tip of my brush. As you can see in the flowers that there's too much paint in the flower rather than a gradient effect. I tried to take off some of the excess paint off the flower but unsuccessfully. So I continue to paint the flowers the usual way. The gradient effect is quite difficult for me and it is something that I need to continue to work on. Fingers crossed that this plate will be okay after glaze firing. Sometimes if I add too much underglaze paint at one spot, the clear glaze would run off from that spot and leave the area without glaze. Now I need to work on the outline of another plate. I'm using my left hand to hold onto my right hand to stabilize it while I draw the line. This is a tough one because it is a long straight line and I really want to keep the line straight and consistently thin. If there's any bare spots, I try to cheat by going back and doing in small tiny strokes to fill in those spots, but I think the overall look of the lines looks pretty good. Last week we visited the store that makes the special Japanese blue pigment paint. The store is called Fukami Shoten and it's located quite close to the Kuraku Kiln. In Japan they call this pigment Gosu. I ordered the purple and green pigments. The pigments come in a concentrated paste, so I had to dilute it with water and use it like watercolor. The shade you want depends on how much water you add to your pigment. This is my first time trying these two colors, so I'm excited to see how they turn out after firing. These are what the color looks like when they are on my bisque test plate. It looked quite vibrant and concentrated. I plan on painting them on the leaves and the grapes of this plate. I wanted to start with a very light green shade for the leaves, so I diluted the green paint even more with water. When I was painting on the leaves, I started at the tip of the leaf and moved the paint around the leaf. I had trouble seeing the brushstroke when I was painting. I think this is because the color of this paint is a lighter green shade. With the blue pigment paint, it is much easier to see the brushstroke as compared to the green. I hope the brushstrokes stay hidden after the firing. I also wanted to try the gradient effect again, but this time with the green paint. So I carefully dipped the paintbrush carefully in the water. It's really hard to see here because the camera is not focused on the brush, but when I was doing it, I can see the water seeping from the tip of the brush. I think I got it this time because the tip of the leaf is much lighter in color compared to the rest of the leaf. We will only know after glaze firing. I think the more I practice, the better I'll get with this technique. After I finished with the leaves, I started with the grapes. I mixed the purple underglaze with water to create a light watercolor purple paint. These grapes are mostly circles, so I found them quite easy to paint, especially with this fatter brush. However, I can see the brush strokes in each grape. Some people like it because the brushstrokes show the maker's style and energy. It also provides a visual interest and texture to the overall look. What do you think? Let me know if you like brushstrokes in artwork. This is another plate I did, and I wanted to create a line around the plate. So I put it on the turntable and used my brush to draw the line. However, I made a mistake and brushed it on the top of the plate, so I end up doing a really thick line for this plate. I think my mistake was because I didn't center my plate properly on the turntable. If I centered it properly, I should be able to easily draw the line only on the side of the plate. While I was visiting all the different pottery shops in Arita, I noticed that a lot of the plates have a blue line or decoration on the foot, so I wanted to do that too. This time I centered the plate properly, so my line was much cleaner. I wrote the kanji characters and my maker's mark on the bottom of the plate. The characters mean the town of Arita. Today I only did painting because I fell off the bike last week and bruised my hand, but I should be back on the wheel next week. The intern at the kiln took me to the library and we borrowed some books on patterns, and this is one of the patterns I got inspired from the book. I noticed that many of the Arita porcelain designs have floral patterns. I think the artisan must be inspired by all the beautiful flowers and wildlife in the area. My design is a lot simpler compared to the typical Arita porcelain designs. I like to have white space in my design because I like the color of white porcelain and I don't want to cover all of it with paint. This is just my design choice as an artist. As I was painting this mug, a little bird flew into the studio, so I included on my mug. Anyways, that concluded day 8 of my residency. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel to follow along on my journey.